Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Masters of the Universe Origins Man-E-Faces figure. Now these figures are starting to turn up here in the UK. This one's actually come all the way from the US, but they're slowly starting to appear in the shops and available online. It's taken rather a long time for them to appear here, which is such a shame, as I've been wanting to grab some of these for ages, but I do finally have Man-E-Faces. So let's take a closer look at the carded version. So as you can see, it comes on a retro style card. I like this card actually, just because it does look so much like the ones that I would have picked up in the shops back in the day. It's got a few new bits of information on the top. It says new for 20, but if you're in the UK it's probably more new for 21, and it has a little logo here that says modern posing retro play, because these really are quite in keeping with the old figures. They're the same scale, they're the same 6-inch size figures, but they've got all new posability, so you should be able to pose them in much better ways. My original Man-E-Faces that you can see here in the background has pretty limited articulation, and these ones are much better. In fact, they have elbows and shoulders and wrists and all sorts, so that you can really pose them quite nicely. If we turn the card over, you can see on the back there's a lovely illustration at the top with a little bit of writing. It says the actor Man-E-Faces changes his face to portray different roles on stage and in battle, and then it shows you some of the figures that you can get. This figure is actually a second wave figure. There were 4 figures in the first wave and there are 4 figures in the second wave, and you can see those here. It's also got the sort of diagram to show you how to turn his head into the different versions, because in one he's human, he's a robot, and then he's a monster. Now I like these cards much better than the Kenner cards that they're doing with the sort of retro style Star Wars figures, just because it actually has information about other figures on it. There's none of this sort of overblown copyright and sort of rules and regulations information. That is all at the bottom here, just in a small panel. On this one you can see it actually shows you different figures that you can get, and to me that is a better card design than what Kenner are producing for the retro collection. It just sort of harks back to the day when we would have bought figures like this in the shops as kids, the fact that you saw other figures to buy, and the simplicity of the front. This was always the way with the He-Man figures. It didn't have a great deal of information on the front. This one does actually say turn head for 3 different faces, but that's about it. What we really need to do is to open this figure up and see what it's like out of the packet. So let's get opening. So here he is, freed from the package. Now as you can see in the back of the package you do get this little comic book called Double Trouble. This comic comes with all 4 of the second wave of figures, so it's the same comic with each one, and it's just a very simple little comic. The only thing that sort of grabbed my attention when I was looking at this is rather than it being stapled together as you would expect with comics, it's actually sewn together. There's a thread been sort of sewn all the way up the spine of it, and that to me is just a mildly interesting sort of little fact. I would have expected them to staple these comics, but no, it's done with a bit of sewing. So just a little interesting sort of aside there, nothing much to do with the figure, but it sort of grabbed my eye when I opened the packet. Now the figure itself, it feels pretty good. It feels much like a sort of an old He-Man figure. It's got quite a nice weight to it, and as I say, these are super articulated figures, so you can really rotate the arms around. These got shoulder joints so you can sort of move them in and out. They've got elbows so that you can bend them at the elbow and also twist at the elbow. You can bend and twist the wrist. If we come down to the waist, it's got a rotatable waist. There's no spring action in that. I do find that a bit disappointing, because I actually really like the spring effect in the old He-Man figures, but that has been removed. And then the hip joints again are sort of fully sort of posable, and you can move them around. Good knee joints as well. You can also rotate at the sort of above the ankle and at the ankle, so there's an extra few joints there, and so it just makes him very posable. But initially on this one, I'm going to say I think the paint application is a little bit sort of duff. I don't like the colour of him to start with. I think the colour they've chosen for his body, the sort of really vibrant, almost sort of Play-Doh colour, sort of orange, just looks really odd. This is the sort of colour I really sort of think of when I think of Man-E-Faces. This sort of it's a sort of a dark skin tone, but it is a skin tone. This just looks so sort of vibrant and orange. It's a bit strange, but I think the application of the paint is a bit rough and ready. You can see there's a paint blob there on one of his biceps. There's a rub there just under part of his armour. On the back there are actually sort of loads of marks on the skin. You can see where it's been scratched and rubbed against other bits of plastic, so it's left little marks there. If you look in his groin area, can you see the staining that we have on one of the legs? I think that's actually, it looks like it's sort of glue or something, but you can see there's quite a lot of staining there. Just generally, I think it's been put together a little bit too cheaply. It's a shame, because it could be a really nice figure. I just think the quality control needs some work. Considering this is brand new out of the packet, it looks a bit scruffy and like it's already been played with. I have this problem with all sort of modern toys. Every modern toy I've bought recently, every time I take it out of the packet, it lacks something. It doesn't have the same sort of quality that a figure like this would have had. Now, these obviously will have flaws in them back in the day, but nowhere near the amount of flaws that you get in modern figures. You know, that is an aside. Let's take a closer look at the sort of figure itself. So you can see, really, Man-E-Faces, the big gimmick with him is that he has three faces. The initial human face, I quite like. It's a little bit sort of, we're a little bit soft on the sculpting. It's not that sharp a detail. If we turn it around, we should get to the robot. That's not too bad, actually. That's looks much like the original one. And then we can go to the monster. And this one, I think, is probably the worst of the lot. It really lacks any definition. It's a flat green colour, and just, yeah, it just doesn't look like there's that much detail on it. If we compare that to the original, I'll bring in my original vintage one here, and we turn it round to the monster. You can see that just looks a whole lot scarier and look like there's a whole lot more detail going on. If we compare it side by side to the modern one, you can see it doesn't look anywhere near as good. The vintage one looks so much better. So well, I think that's a little bit of a shame. We'll compare the others as well. Let's turn it around to the human ones and just have a look at those. I just think they are a bit soft on the sculpting. The vintage original one looks a lot better. We'll do the same with the robot as well, just so you can see all three side by side. Yeah, the robot is probably the best of the lot, but still it lacks something compared to the original one. But it's, you know, it's still not bad, I suppose. The one thing that this new figure does have is the fact that you can actually rotate the head at the neck joint as well, so we can turn that around, and the face inside moves, and we can rotate that separately. That's a feature that the original one didn't have. But as I say, there's no spring-loaded waist. This one, you can have the lovely spring-loaded waist action, and I'm sure they could have worked out a way of doing that on these newer figures. But you know, I guess they think that the kids don't want that sort of action feature. But overall, otherwise, yeah, the sculpting, in my mind, is soft overall. There's not the sort of hard details and sharp details that this original one had. You can see all the sort of the pipe work is much more defined on here. It looks a little bit sort of lost in this one, and the colouring, yeah, doesn't do it for me. But you know, I'm sure some people will like the way that this is painted. I just think it's a really strange sort of orange colour. He does come with a blaster, which is much like the original blaster, if a little bit smaller, and again in a sort of more orangey colour. This one is a sort of more reddy colour, but yeah, it fits in his hand quite nicely. And the figure does actually pose and can be stood in sort of all sorts of poses. We can even stand it in the sort of wide stance that the old figures were in like that. It's certainly a very poseable figure. I'm just unconvinced with how it's been painted. Now, one other feature of these modern Origins figures is that you can actually take them apart fairly easily. I can see this being quite useful for people who want to customise figures. You can easily sort of pull their arms and their legs off, but I can also see this being a case that you're going to find lots of these toys in future at car boot sales and sort of rummage markets and all sorts of things with limbs missing, because if I was to give this to any child, the first thing they're going to do is pull all the bits off and start swapping them around, and you'll end up with a figure like this lying about with the arms missing. So it's sort of interesting that you can do this, but I think from a sort of a future-proofing type design, I can see you'll find lots of these with parts missing further down the line. They're certainly not designed to be particularly robust. If you think of these original figures, all you could do was take the arms off, and even that was actually quite a hard thing to do. So as a kid, actually breaking an original He-Man figure was pretty hard work, whereas I think breaking one of these Origins ones is going to be quite straightforward, and I think that's the first thing that any child will do is exactly what I did there and pull the arms off it. So I can see that being a problem in future. Overall, I think these figures are certainly not too bad compared to what Kenner are producing for the Star Wars line. These Mattel figures are considerably superior. They certainly feel sturdy and they feel sort of robust, apart from the fact that you can sort of pull the arms off. As display pieces, they will display very nicely. It may be I even come to sort of repaint some of this to make it look a little bit more sort of like the original figure. But you know, the the basic figure itself is certainly pretty good. I do actually have on order the Skeletor figure, but as I say, in the UK these are taking a long time to come through, so I've got to wait another at least sort of month and a bit before that one arrives, and I will review Skeletor as soon as I get him. I do need to say a massive thank you to Mark from Retro Toy Shop on Instagram. I'll put a link to his account because he actually sent this to me as a Christmas present, and it was a very kind thing to do, so thanks to Mark for sending that over. It was a lovely thing to get, and even though I sort of discussed and sort of pulled apart this figure in the video, I'm going to be putting this on display because it's a lovely present to have, and as you can see I have my original here, so the two of them together are going to look great. I hope my review of this Masters of the Universe Origins figure has been of interest to you. If it has, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.